Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Katie Zontak. I'm the Director of Cultural Arts at the JCC in Buffalo, and I'm excited to be having our first program in our cooking series with Chef Marshall Goldstein, who we were lucky enough to connect with early on in the pandemic. And he's kind enough to keep joining us. I believe this might be our third year doing this series from Toledo, Ohio, that we're lucky to be able to, join and connect with other people outside the Buffalo community, which makes it extra special for us. So before I turn it over to Chef Marshall, I just want to ask that you all stay muted while he's presenting. If you have any questions about the recipe or anything that he's doing, he has his technical assistant, his son Sam, working with him. So you can feel free to send any of your questions in the chat, and then he'll go ahead and ask Chef Marshall, and we'll get those answers for you. And we can just sit back and enjoy. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chef. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here. But before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment and of silence for the young man from the Buffalo Bills football team I was watching the other night. I'm a big Cincinnati Bengals fan, and I was just shocked beyond belief at what happened. And if we could all just take a quick moment of silence and say a little prayer for the young man who's in the hospital. Thank you very much. Again, it's my pleasure and honor to be here to do another year of cooking with you. As you will know, as we start to go along, you'll see Katie has all the recipes ahead of time this time. I made sure that she's got them so that it gives you the chance to be able to go out and get the ingredients and maybe follow along and cook while I'm doing the process here at my house. You're doing it in yours. I selected Kugel, a cranberry Kugel tonight. I was thinking in terms of how close we are to Tu B'Shvat. And originally I was going to do pomegranates, but we do pomegranates during the Jewish New Year. And I was trying to think of something that correlates with the planting of the trees. And I couldn't think of anything else but the beautiful cranberries. And because they're so underused. So I decided that it would be great. And this is a recipe I absolutely love. It's kind of like the Jewish bread pudding, if you will. And I always tell people, depending on what kind of kugel you make, it makes for a really great side dish at a meal with a brisket dinner or chicken dinner, or it makes for a really great dessert. Personally, myself and my wife, we like to wake up the next day after I've made it and go ahead and heat it up for breakfast. So it could also be used as a really nice breakfast meal as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I do want to make one comment about the recipe. If you have bought the ingredients, it's not. I'm happy that you're able to follow with me along. I did make one little substitution because the supply chain isn't always as good as it used to be. In terms of the cranberries, the recipe itself calls for a 16-ounce can of jellied cranberries. I like using the jellied cranberries. It's a topping, so it's pretty much like a custard plain like kugel with the vanilla and the sugar and cinnamon inside, and then it has a topping of cranberries at the very end. So I changed my recipe up just a little bit, and what I do is I actually use sun-dried cranberries, and I actually incorporate them into the kugel. And then I do a more traditional sweet cornflake topping. And we'll get to that part in just a minute. So we're going to start. The recipe calls for 8 ounces of medium noodles. Well, I don't know about you, but I've gone to the store and I've never been able to find an 8-ounce bag of noodles. So I use a 12-ounce bag of noodles. It doesn't harm the recipe at all. In fact, it gives you a little bit more more richness in the noodles and in the custard as well. So we're going to take these, we're going to go ahead and cook these off in some boiling water. We put the whole package in there, and I'm going to give it a nice little stir. Turn the heat up a little bit. It's a nice rolling boil. And then what we're going to do while the noodles are cooking, we're actually going to go ahead and make the filling. So we're going to start off with an 8-ounce brick of cream cheese. Third cup of sugar. 4 eggs. And then what I do with that right there, I go ahead and I get a nice mix on it. Be a little bit careful not to turn it on too high. We don't want it to splatter everywhere. If it sticks in the spindle, take a minute and just push it on through. Turn it on about medium speed. So you see it starting to mix really, really nice. The idea is that we're making a custard. Or even more close to just almost just like a cheesecake filling. And we want it to blend real nice and evenly. Once we get it to the point where you start to see little stones, like we'd call them, little pebbles of the cream cheese, we know we're at that right point. We want to go ahead and take our melted butter. Half a cup of melted butter, 1 stick, buy that. About a teaspoon of vanilla. About a half of a teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon. 1 cup of sour cream. Now, some people might like to use the cottage cheese instead. Perfectly fine. It won't blend as well as the cream cheese and the sour cream together to make more of like a custard, but it really won't make a difference. It's still going to come out nice. 1 cup of milk. And we're going to put that back down, and we're going to start mixing it up real nice. We're going to have a real nice custard-like consistency to it. Noodles. Overcook the noodles. We want to make sure that they're nice and pliable, but then we cook them we're going to cook the noodles about 3/4 of the way. This gives us the opportunity to get them pliable and actually cook out some of the starch in it. And then we're able to go ahead and blend it with the rest of our mix, the custard, and that'll give us the opportunity when it bakes, it'll finish cooking. And what I like to do from time to time in the mixing process is to go ahead and actually scrape down the bowl. You can pretty much see how it's forming a nice custard, nice rich flavors. Just want to make sure we scrape the bowl down real well. And then put that back on. Now, while that's working and our noodles are still cooking, we're going to go ahead and make the cornflake topping And the cornflake topping, I know the recipe is not, I did not share the recipe, but I will right now. So it's 2 cups of cornflakes, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, and 2 tablespoons of melted butter, which we're going to wait on here for just a second. But before that, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to crush up the cornflakes and the brown sugar together. Not everybody does it this way necessarily. You can leave them whole if you want. Pour that right in there, just like so. And then we're just going to go ahead and mix it together. Kind of just like a streusel topping. That. Let's check our mix. It's perfect, just where we want it to be. And then check our noodles. You can see how that they're starting to really get nice and loose. They're easy, they're pliable. Right about now is the time we want to go ahead and take them off of the stove. And we want to come over here and we want to drain them. Drain them nice and easy. And I try to shake the strainer because what happens is these noodles are nice and hot and they're nice and curly. And we want to make sure that we take the time to get as much of that wetness off so it doesn't dilute our custard. We're then going to go ahead and take the noodles. We're going to pour them right into the custard, just like this. You can see where the noodles are starting to break a little bit. So if you cook them any further than that, they would have broken up inside. So we're going to mix this together. And then we're going to go ahead and take about 3 to 4 ounces of cranberries. We're going to go ahead and mix those in. A nice, real nice mixture. We want to mix this pretty consistency for just a few minutes. We don't want the noodles to cook the custard. Typically, if you wanted to, I would suggest you actually go ahead and let the noodles sit at room temperature for a few moments before you put them into the custard. That way it gives you the noodles a little bit of time to cool down, just to ensure that they won't cook the custard. Then we're going to go ahead and take a 7 by 13, I believe it is, or 7 by 11 Pyrex dish. And I went ahead and sprayed it ahead of time. We're going to pour it right on in. Should fill up the entire dish. Then we're going to go ahead and make sure this is all mixed very well. And then just very lightly put it over the top.
Are you using dried cranberries? They're sun-dried, correct?
They're a sun-dried cranberry, correct. They're called craisins. Typically, you can find them in the dried fruit area of the grocery store. And again, what the recipe didn't call for us to mix dried cranberries in. But again, we're talking about the evils of a supply chain that's out there nowadays. Sometimes you can get things and sometimes you can't. So you just spread it over the top real nice and even. I try to spread it out to the sides so that every little piece gets some of the topping. A lot of people use cornflakes. Some people use breadcrumbs. Some people use nuts. Some people use a combination of cornflakes and nuts, which is just absolutely wonderful. If you're looking for a different type of kugel to make during the high holy days, for example, using nuts is a wonderful, wonderful thing. If you want to do a savory type of kugel, you know, there's all kinds of different things you could add to the noodles itself. A lot of ones that I've done before, obviously, are during Pesach are potato kugels. And I typically will go ahead and caramelize some onions and use those inside because the potatoes and onions just taste so really good. So with this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this and we're going to put it right on in the oven. Right down on the bottom shelf. I'm going to push it all the way in. We're going to cook it 40 minutes. And the rest is easy. Now, when it comes out, the best thing is if you can make it the day ahead of time, it turns out really, 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 really nice. It sets up so that when you cut into it, it comes out like a real nice piece of cake almost, or like the bread pudding we were talking about. And the best way to show you that is to go ahead and show you a piece that's on a plate. And as you can see, the nice formation of the cranberries and the custard, how it sets in and with the noodles, and it actually creates almost like its own layers. Pretty tasty dessert, pretty tasty breakfast. And that was pretty much cranberry kugel. I know that was relatively quick, but the process is relatively easy once you make the custard and you blend everything together, cooking the noodles and putting it in the oven and then just waiting.
Have you ever experimented with adding flavor to the custard?
So the custard has vanilla and cinnamon in it. I would say that if you're going to experience like different types of flavors, maybe if depending on what kind of kugel you're looking to make, maybe thinking about some type of like the flavors that they use for the coffees, like hazelnut, maybe
put like pecans in them.
French vanilla, pecans. You can add pecans with it. Like I said, some people use pecans in their crust on the top. If you do use a nut, one thing I would suggest is taking their nuts and putting them on a sheet tray and putting them in a 350-degree oven for about 5 to 10 minutes, and roasting them. Because what that does is it really, really brings the oils out, the real true flavors of nut. Walnuts, for example, which are so extremely plentiful almost everywhere you go. Here in Toledo, there's walnut trees all over the place. If you're cooking with walnuts, I highly suggest that you put them in the oven first. Really, really draws out the rich flavor of the nut. Otherwise, walnuts are a fairly bland nut and have kind of like a, I don't know how to explain it, kind of like a very bland taste to them. So I honestly didn't think it was going to take that quick.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I think, who is it? Bonnie wrote in the chat that she likes quick meals. So that's, yeah, something good, like on a weeknight, if you're crunched for time, you can see that you could probably make this relatively quickly.
I mean,
I want to invite anybody to just go ahead and unmute if you do have any comments or questions for Chef Marshall. Feel free to just, instead of using the chat, you can feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask, or if you've had experience with making kugels, or, you know, a little short story or anything to share. We, you know, definitely have the time to do it. Otherwise, we're good. But do you ever add, like, I've never made a kugel. I mean, could you add, like how you were saying savory, could you do something with like some kind of a vegetable? Is that something that people do too, like a spinach or anything like that? Or
See, this is what I always tell everybody. You know, everybody says there's only one way to make a potato latke. Well, there are a couple of different ways to actually variations of making a potato latke in terms of the method. In terms of like making it different, like making the kugel different, there's a lot of different ways you can make it, but then henceforth, kugel, if we're talking kugel, we want to make a savory kugel, then I would say, yeah, go ahead and saute off some onions, some spinach, put some different cheese in there, maybe a nice smoked cheddar or even a smoked Gruyere cheese, which is like a smoked Swiss type of cheese, that gives it a whole entire different flavor. And the balance of things is that when you eat the kugel, it now becomes that side dish, or it could even, in some respect, become the main entree. We look at lasagna. How many different ways do you make lasagna? Not everybody makes it the same way. When they make spinach lasagna, cheese lasagna, meat lasagna, there's so many different ways. If I was gonna do this as a savory kugel, I think I probably would use spinach. Or maybe one vegetable that not too many people do use is Swiss chard, which has lovely flavors when you cook them. It's a big leafy vegetable, and combine it with some sauteed onions. If you like mushrooms would be really good as well. And then a blend of cheeses. The base of the kugel, whether you use the cream cheese or the cottage cheese, I would say if you're going to do a sweet kugel, the cream cheese has a better flavor towards sweet kugels. If you're going to do savory, I would say use the cottage cheese because it has a little bit more of a sour taste to it. And when you're blending that together along with the rest of the recipe, you're probably, if making a savory kugel, you're probably going to omit the vanilla, creating less of a sweet flavor to the kugel itself. The kugel itself is very, very dense. It's a very heavy meal. But it was made to be that way because it's relatively easy to make. And again, you're waiting on the cooking process in the oven, but it's also a very inexpensive meal to make. So it's something that in our house, I make kugel, I cut them up into pieces, and then I freeze them for a later date. If I'm running late and my wife needs to eat before me, she pulls it out of the freezer and she goes ahead and cooks the piece off for herself, and it's a very fulfilling meal. So good question. And another one I would probably also think about doing is more of like a Mediterranean style carrot type of savory kugel.
If you use like a Gruyere cheese, then what do you leave out? Is the question.
If you use the Gruyere cheese, so if you're using Gruyere, and you're making a savory kugel, again, you're going to probably omit the sugar and the vanilla. The sugar and the vanilla and the cinnamon in the kugel recipe is there to make it more of that dessert type of flavor. Instead of having that and you're using the Gruyere cheese, I probably would use a combination of cheeses. Use the Gruyere and then maybe use like a sharp cheddar to balance, because the Gruyere cheese has a real pungent flavor to it as well. And then have that flavor balance. And of course, if you're going to add any kind of vegetable to go along with it, onions seem to be the best. I would use a sweet Vidalia onion to make the kugel. Hope that helps.
I think so. Well,
If-
unless anybody else has any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. When you're making a savory kugel, obviously the topping would change then also. What would you use for a topping? Would you still use cornflakes, or would you then go to using breadcrumbs or something like that?
Well, that's a good question. Breadcrumbs would be the easiest route to go. Of course, you know, it's because we use breadcrumbs as a topping for a lot of different things. Lasagna, there's certain vegetarian lasagnas that people like to use that they like that crunchiness over the top. In terms of what I would do, I think that I would probably go ahead and look for this again is a savory type of kugel. If I don't put if I don't have two kinds of cheeses in it, if I'm not putting a cheese in it and it's just like onions and spinach, let's say, I probably would look for some type of a flavored cracker, you know, some type of there's different types of multigrain crackers you can get. There's different types of cheddar cheese crackers you can get. I saw at one of the stores recently, there's a cracker, they call it a pita, and it's Asiago cheese. And over the summer, my wife and I were camping, and we stayed in a cabin that was very rustic, and it had a stovetop and stuff. I was feeling like maybe I was out of my element in terms of cooking us a meal. And I happened to realize that I brought along two types of crackers. One was a rosemary flavored Triscuit, and the other one was this Asiago cheese little pita chips. And so I crushed them up and used them as a breading for a chicken breast. Absolutely phenomenal. The kugel, again, even if you are using a cheese on the inside, I think it's like a nice finish to the top. You know, instead of thinking, well, breadcrumbs is the only thing I'm going to have, look in your cupboard. I tell people the best way to cook sometimes is seeing what's in your cupboard. I recently talked with a gentleman just the other evening, and he said he grew up and his father every Friday or Saturday night, excuse me, they would have for dinner, they would have Muscos. And I said, Muscos? What's Musco? I've never heard of that before. He said, my father would stand in front of the refrigerator, open it up and say, everything must go. And I thought that is tradition growing up in my generation growing up. That's a very traditional thing because we never wasted food. Nobody threw anything out. You know, if you had a nice cheese and onion quiche, you went ahead and you reheated it, or you took it out and you scooped out the insides of it and you made a new casserole out of it, you know, and topped it with some more cheese. My father always used to blend foods together like that too. I thought it was crazy. He's the only man I've ever known in my entire life that ate potato chips with mustard and ketchup. It's a potato, you know? So, but I tell people when it comes to cooking, I once started a blog and I never followed through with it because I was a very young chef at the time and had a lot going on, called Cupboard Catering. If you want to be creative with something like doing a savory kugel or some type of a savory dish, go to your cupboards, open them up and see what you have that's interesting that you wouldn't typically use for something like that. And then go ahead and try it. You know, it's all a process. It's trial and error. Some people wonder how I come up with some of the crazy things. Yesterday, I took 2 chocolate chip cookies and slathered peanut butter between the 2 of them. And it was a great peanut butter and chocolate chip sandwich. You just have to be willing to be open-minded, you know, but everything. So I hope you've enjoyed our time. I'm sorry that it was so short. Kugel is not something that takes a long time to make. And maybe that's why in our part of the world as Jews, and even as non-Jews, we make a nice, easy recipe out of it because it doesn't take long for the egg noodles to cook, and we're adding custard to it and we're baking it. You know, this is the goods right here.
Yeah,
This
looks great.
This is Chef Marshall's dessert. So I hope you've enjoyed our time together, and I'm looking forward to this year, coming season. We have, I forget what the next one is. Katie, do you happen to know which one I told you?
Yeah, I feel like, so the date that the next one is on, February 1st. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Tasty Starter,
Crepe block.
Crepe Block. Okay, thank you.
Crepe block. And then in March, we have the Festival of Esther. And in this house, that is a very, very, very big to do for at least the last 16 years, as my daughter tell you. And we're making Hamantaschens. And the beauty about making Hamantaschens is a lot of people say, well, once you make the dough and you do the cutouts and you put the stuff inside it, it's a wash. It doesn't take a very long. But here's the greatest thing about Hamantaschens. I happen to be the inventor of the non-traditional. Okay, I take things that have been tradition in our Jewish heritage for hundreds of years, and I deconstruct them and I make something totally different. This is what I'm saying. Go to your cupboard and open up your cupboard and have an open mind as to what you want to create. For many, many years, you know, people at Pesach would say, oh, matzah. What am I going to make? You know, dessert. We got to have a dessert. What am I going to make? And everyone would go ahead and make a sponge cake because you could use egg whites to aerate the matzah, the cake meal, and make a beautiful cake out of it. And I would make a strawberry trifle cake out of it. Wonderful, great. But then they would be like, what else am I gonna? We're gonna make matzah bark. Oh, that's thrilling. You know, nowadays, nowadays you can make baklava, you can make cannoli, you can go ahead and make different types of pies. You can make, like I said earlier to Katie, tostada shells and taco chips. That's one of my favorite things to do during Pesach. I actually take the matzah and I'll wet it with warm water for a brief period of time, put a bowl on it, cut around the bowl, and fry it in oil, just like a regular taco shell. And it tastes amazing. Put a little when it comes out, put a little taco seasoning over the top of it. Whoo! Something different to try and worth every moment of the time you spend on it. Hamantaschens are one of my favorite things to make in terms of like cookies, other than my Bubby's Mundelbrot. And that's because I like to play around with them. We'll get out the peanut butter, we'll get out different types of chocolates. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then we end the series with Gan Eden layer cake for Pesach, because again, I want people to look at the traditional and say, yeah, you know, we can have that anytime, but let's try something new. And this will be definitely some fun. Definitely some fun. Involves apricot glaze and I think a chocolate ganache on the end, if I recall correctly. So
Sounds good.
yes, it's been a pleasure being with you again tonight. I'll take a picture of the final result of our kugel that we made and send it out in an email.
Perfect.
And
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I like to always tell people if you do make the recipe and you want to send us pictures or you have questions while you're making it, you can feel free to email me and I can pass it along to Chef Marshall. And I can also resend the recipe in case anybody missed it and this recording to everybody that was on today too. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Chef. You and Sam get to go enjoy your kugel now. Wish we all had a piece as well.
be more like me and my wife, but that's okay. Sam's here. Parents.
All right. Well, thank you and hope to see you guys all in February then.
Fantastic. Thanks
Okay.
and
Bye-bye.
great night.